So this tip is to show our periods dynamically. Now you might have noticed when we put this income statement report together that actually we've got actuals and actuals prior year, but prior year to what? What year are we actually looking at, or which month are we looking at? And actually, this is all of the data. So this is 5 years worth of data, and essentially this is 4 years worth of data, or whatever it is. So what we can do is we can focus this on a specific month or year, and that will be able to give us the right context. So we can give us the actuals for that year, and then the value for the same period last year. So for the given month, say, and then for that same period what it was last year. So that would make much more sense. So now if we go into, if we just want to add, say, a slicer, and we can add in our dates, we can now add multiple fields into a slicer and it will give it to us as a hierarchy. So we can do year, and let's do this as a drop down. So we click on here as drop down, and actually let's also drag on then month. So that's not going to work as a drop down anymore. Let's do it as a list. And now we can see here, and let's just increase the values. And let's actually put on single select. So we only want to make sure we've got either a single year or a single month selected. And let's click on the labels here and make this slightly bigger. So items even. And let's make that 14 as well. So now we can see here we've got the whole of 2008 selected. So now this is showing us our 2008 actuals and our 2017 actuals. Or if we were selecting a particular month, then this would show us our March 2008 actuals and our March 2007 in the prior year, and the variance of the percentage. So now this makes a lot more sense. But actually, what if we wanted to just kind of either look at monthly numbers or quarter to date or year to date? We'd have to keep changing the selections, and it would be quite annoying, I think, to have to do that. So one of the things we can do is create a dynamic month to date, quarter to date, year to date values, and we can actually have a slicer where they select either MTD, QTD, or YTD. The challenge is we don't have a table that has those values in there, and we can't put a measure on a slicer. So even if we were to create a measure with those three values somehow, we would be able to do that. But what we can do is we can just put them into a new table that we can create with those values. And it doesn't have to be part of the data model in terms of relationships or anything, but we can just call it here periods. So we just go to enter data. So from the home tab, we click on enter data, create a table, and we just create it with these values: month to date, quarter to date, year to date. If we want to, for them to appear in a particular order, we can also add an order column there as well. And let's just call this period selection. And load that into the data model. And now what it's done is it's loaded, I already had one in there, apologies, but it's loaded a period selection table in there, which is just a disconnected table. So there's no relationships we can create between this and anything else. So let's just leave it disconnected. But we can still use it as part of the header. So we can drag period on here, so as part of a slicer. So we could drag period in there, make it a slicer, and actually let's make it look a bit like buttons. So we can do under general, orientation, vertical, and let's give a background with white text, and now they're starting to look a little bit like buttons. So we can format our slices to look like that. Let's take off the header, and now we've got the month to date, quarter to date, year to date selected. Now the challenge is this isn't going to impact any of our data in our income statement here because we've got no relationships. It's just a disconnected table. So what we'll have to do is actually create a new measure that actually looks at what's been selected in here. So actually what's really important is to make sure on here that we do selection controls and make sure we have single select enabled. And this will make sure then there's only ever going to be only one value selected. And that means we can actually, I'm just going to change this background to be a bit lighter so it's a bit easier to see what we've got selected there. This makes sure that we've got one and only one value selected in here, and that means that we can then use it as part of the measure. So let's do that. So now what we can do is create a new measure, and let's call this actuals by period. And here we're going to start using things called variables. So it's just a way for us to break up our code a bit to make it easier to read, a bit easier to understand. So give it a name, and we're going to call this selected period. And what we can use here is the selected value. So we can only use this when we know that a column is going to return only one value. If it doesn't, we have to give it a default essentially in alternate result. So here we can do selected value and period selection period. So we want to pick out the value that's selected. So remember that's a column because we put that as a new table, disconnected table, and put it as our slicer. And we shouldn't get any alternate result because on this page at least, we've got a single select slicer, but just in case we're using this on another page, let's default it to month to date. So now we've got our selected period. Now what we need to do is return a different measure based on what's been selected in the slicer. So we do on the return, and we can use a switch statement here. So a switch statement, a switch function allows us to be able to look at a value, and for any combination of any possible value that's in a formula, or in this case in a variable, we can return a corresponding result. So we start with the expression. So we want to look at selected period, and then it says, well, for each value, what do we want to return? So let's say if we want to return month to date. So now what we need to do is return our monthly numbers. So again, we want to return actuals, but again, what we want to do is return the monthly actuals to make sure it's just for the month that's selected. So if we do calculate actuals, and now we can do, we could use a function called dates mtd. So dates mtd is going to give us exactly what we want. So for the period that we've got selected, so if we've got March selected, it will give us all the dates for that month. And again, it's asking us for our calendar table, for our date table. So if we do dim dates, date again, we can then pass that in. And that's our statement for month to date. And then it's very similar for the other three. So if it's quarter to date, we want to do calculate actuals and do dates QTD. So all of these functions are kind of shortcut functions built in for us already. And again, we could do dim dates date, so we pass in our calendar table. And then for year to date, we do calculate actuals, dates YTD. And then our last result has to be if none of those are true. So essentially if nothing's selected, or and again, we shouldn't do this because we've defaulted to month to date, but let's just put actuals in as our kind of catch-all value if else. So we need that last condition in there for this switch statement to work. So we've got actuals by period, we've got selected value period selection, so this is what's been selected from our slicer. We've then got based on what's returned, so if MTD has been selected in slicer, return the actuals calculated in the dates MTD context. Otherwise, if it's QTD, calculate our actuals in dates QTD context. Otherwise, YTD, calculate in the dates YTD context. So that's going to work now. And what we can do then is we can still have our slicer, or we can have one of those. And now in here, let's put in replace our value in here with, rather than actuals, do actuals by period. And actually, let's change our measures and do, rather than referring to actuals, refer to actuals by period. So in our prior year, it gives us our actuals by period, same period last year. And I think that should be it. And the variance is going to be actuals by period divided by actuals prior year, and the other measure built on this, so that's fine. And now this is going to give us our values. So at the moment it's giving us our monthly values for, say, March, or for any given month. And then if we do quarter to date, now these are quarterly values. And if we did year to date, they're their yearly values, which for March is going to be the same thing for quarter to date and year to date. But if we do June, for example, now we can start to see they're actually different. And actually, let's just go back and format. We pick out our format from here, our actuals, pick out our format number string, and let's just make sure that our other two measures are formatted in the same way. So let's go to custom and enter the format string in there. And now we've got a fully dynamic income statement that's showing in the way that we want when we're selecting a year and a month, and it will give us the actuals for that month to date, quarter to date, or year to date, and for the same period last year, and the variance and the percentage variance.